The stars were cold and empty in this part of the galaxy, and no one came here because there was nothing to find and nothing to take. And that was exactly why the Valari had come here to die in peace. Their 3 colony ships drifted slowly through the darkness, and inside them 12,000 souls waited for the end that they knew was coming soon. And there was no hope left in their hearts, because hope had abandoned them long ago when their world had turned against them. The Valari were a gentle people with silver skin and large dark eyes that could see beauty in the smallest things, and they had lived on their blue world for 10,000 years, building cities of crystal and gardens that sang with the wind, and they had never made war and never sought conquest, and they believed that kindness was the highest virtue a species could hold. But the universe did not care about virtue. Cosmic plague had come to their world without warning, and it had turned their beautiful atmosphere into poison, and their crystal cities had crumbled, and their singing gardens had withered and died, and the Valari had been forced to flee with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the memories of everything they had lost. Now they floated in the void with food supplies running low and water recyclers failing, and children crying from hunger, and elders giving up their rations so the young could live another day. And High Elder Torvan walked the corridors of the lead ship and saw the despair in every face and felt the weight of his failure crushing his ancient heart. He had led his people to safety, but safety meant nothing if they starved in the darkness between the stars. Torvan stood at the observation window and looked out at the endless black, and he whispered a prayer to whatever gods might be listening. But he did not expect an answer because the gods had been silent for a very long time. Then the sensors detected something. A ship was approaching. And it was not Valari, and it was not any design that Torvan recognized, and fear gripped his heart because they had heard stories of species that hunted refugees and took them as slaves, and the Valari had no weapons and no way to defend themselves. The communication system crackled to life, and a voice came through speaking in a language the translation system struggled to decode, and then the words became clear. This is Dr. Emily Parker of the Human Research Vessel, Meridian, and we have received your distress signal, and we are coming to help. Torvan did not know what a human was, and he did not know if this was a trick, and he looked at his advisors and saw the same uncertainty in their eyes. But what choice did they have? And so he answered, "We are the Valari, and we are refugees, and we have nothing to offer you, and we are dying." The human ship came alongside their lead vessel, and it was small compared to the Valari colony ships, but it moved with purpose and confidence. And then a shuttle detached and flew across the gap between them, and Torvan went to the docking bay to meet whatever fate awaited his people. The airlock opened, and Emily Parker stepped through, and she was small by Valari standards, with brown skin and dark curly hair and eyes that held a warmth that Torvan had not seen in a very long time. And she looked at him, and she looked at the thin and hungry Valari gathered behind him, and something changed in her face, something that looked like determination. "How many of you are there?" she asked. 12,000, Torvan replied, and his voice cracked with shame, because it was not enough, and it was too many, and they could not feed them, and they could not save them. Emily nodded, and she pulled out a communication device, and she started talking rapidly to someone on her ship, and Torvan heard words like emergency and priority 1, and reroute all supplies, and he did not understand what was happening. "Dr. Parker," Torvan said softly, "we have nothing to pay you with, and we cannot repay your kindness, and you should know this before you help us." Emily looked at him, and she smiled, and it was a smile that held no expectation, and no calculation, and no hidden agenda. "Elder Torvan," she said, "we do not help people because we expect payment, and we help people because it is the right thing to do, and because we have the ability to do so, and because turning away from suffering is not something humans do." She reached out and took his hand, and her skin was warm against his silver fingers. "We have 6 months of supplies on our ship," she said, "and they were meant for a research outpost. But the outpost can wait, and your people cannot wait. And so the supplies are yours. Torvan felt tears forming in his eyes. And he had not cried since he was a child, but he could not stop them now. It is not enough. Emily continued, but I have called for help, and more ships are coming. And we will find you a new home, and we will make sure your people survive. Why Torvan whispered, and he could not understand because in his experience, the universe took and never gave anything back. Emily squeezed his hand, and her eyes were bright with emotion because 200 years ago, my ancestors were refugees too. She said, and they floated in space with nothing and no hope, and another species helped them when they did not have to, and my people survived because of that kindness, and we made a promise that we would always pay it forward. She paused and looked at the hungry children peeking out from behind their parents. Today, we pay it forward to you. 3 days later, 4 more human ships arrived carrying food and water and medicine and atmospheric scrubbers and water purifiers and seeds for planting and tools for building and everything the Valari would need to start again. The humans worked alongside the Valari without rest and without complaint, and they shared their food and their stories and their laughter, and the Valari children learned human games and the human crew learned Valari songs, and something beautiful began to grow in the space between 2 species that had never met before. On the 7th day, Emily came to Torvan with a star chart, and she pointed to a small green world in human-adjacent space. This world is unclaimed, she said, and our scientists have scanned it, and the atmosphere is compatible with your biology, and there is fresh water and fertile soil, and it can be your new home if you want it. Torvan stared at the image of the green world, and he could not speak because his heart was too full. Emily, she finally managed to say, how can we ever repay this debt? Emily placed her hand over her heart, and she looked at him with those warm brown eyes. You owe us a small debt, she said, and you can pay it forward someday when you have the ability to help someone else who is suffering, and that is all we ask. Torvan placed his own hand over his heart and mirrored her gesture. We will remember this, he said, and his voice was a solemn vow, and we will remember you, and we will remember humanity, and when the day comes that we can pay this debt forward, we will do so with everything we have. Emily smiled, and she had no idea what her kindness would become. And she had no idea that her simple act of compassion would echo across 200 years, and she had no idea that she had just changed the course of galactic history. The Valari settled on their new world, and they named it Parker's Gift, and they built new cities and new gardens, and they grew strong, and they multiplied, and they never forgot. Every Valari child learned the story of Emily Parker and the humans who saved them, and every Valari adult carried the debt in their heart, and every Valari leader asked the same question: how do we pay forward a debt this large? And so they built, and they prepared, and they waited for the day when humanity would need them. That day would come, and when it did, the Valari would be ready. 200 years passed, and humanity forgot about the Valari, the way people forget about small kindnesses done long ago, and the story of Emily Parker became a footnote in history books that nobody read, and the coordinates of Parker's Gift were filed away in databases that nobody accessed, and life went on as it always does. Earth had grown strong in those 2 centuries, and humanity had spread across dozens of worlds and built great cities among the stars, and they had made allies and trading partners, and they believed they were safe, and they believed the universe was mostly friendly, and they were wrong about both of those things. The Dominion had been watching. They were an empire older than human civilization, and they had conquered 1,000 worlds and enslaved 100 species, and they viewed the galaxy as their property, and they viewed younger races as resources to be harvested and used and discarded when they were no longer useful. Dominion had watched humanity grow, and they had calculated the value of human labor and human minds and human bodies, and they had decided that the time had come to add another species to their collection. They came without warning on a Tuesday morning when the children of Earth were walking to school, and the workers were commuting to their jobs, and the world was going About its ordinary business, the sky turned dark with ships. Humanity had orbital defense platforms, and they had a fleet of warships, and they had believed these things would protect them, but the Dominion had been fighting wars since before humans had discovered fire, and they knew exactly how to break a younger species. The orbital defenses fell in 6 hours, and the planetary shields lasted 3 days, and the human fleet fought with desperate courage, but they were outnumbered and outgunned, and one by one the brave ships went silent and dark. By the end of the first week, Earth belonged to the Dominion ambassador. Kevin Mitchell watched the invasion from a bunker beneath the ruins of Geneva, and he had been Earth's voice to the galactic community, and now he was just another human hiding in the rubble, waiting to be found and taken and broken. The great cities burned above him, and he could hear the Dominion ships passing overhead, and he could hear the screams in the distance, and he knew that humanity was being rounded up like cattle and shipped to labor camps and experimentation facilities, and fates worse than death. Kevin had sent distress calls to every species humanity had ever contacted, and he had begged for help, and he had offered everything Earth had and he had promised anything they wanted if they would just send ships and soldiers and hope. None of them answered. Centauri had been humanity's closest allies for 50 years, and they had shared technology and culture and friendship, and Kevin had been certain they would come, but instead, they sent a message expressing their deepest condolences and their sincere regret that they could not risk Dominion retaliation by intervening in what they called an internal matter. Kevin had stared at that message for a long time, and something inside him had died. The hegemony expressed deep concern and promised to raise the issue at the next council meeting, which was scheduled for 6 months from now, and Kevin laughed when he read that message because in 6 months, there would be no humans left to save. The trade consortium offered thoughts and prayers and then continued doing business with the Dominion, because profit did not care about morality, and credits did not care about suffering. One by one, humanity's so-called allies turned away and closed their doors and pretended not to hear the screaming, and Kevin understood finally that humanity had never had allies at all, and they had only had trading partners who smiled when times were good and vanished when times were bad. He sat in the darkness of the bunker and listened to the reports coming in from around the world, and each report was worse than the last, and the human resistance was crumbling, and the population centers were being emptied, and the Dominion was efficient and thorough and patient. They had done this before. They knew exactly how to break a species. Kevin looked at the communication console, and it was silent, and it had been silent for days, and he had stopped hoping for a response, because hope was a luxury he could no longer afford. He thought about his daughter who had been visiting the Luna colony when the invasion began, and he did not know if she was alive or dead or worse, and he thought about his wife, who had died 3 years ago, and he was grateful that she did not have to see this. He thought about giving up, and then the console beeped. Kevin stared at it for a long moment because he had stopped expecting anything, and he thought perhaps it was a malfunction or a trick or his mind playing cruel games with him, but the console beeped again, and a message was waiting. He opened it with trembling hands. The message was encrypted using a protocol that humanity had not used in 200 years, and it took the computer several minutes to decode it, and Kevin watched the progress bar with hollow eyes, expecting nothing. The message appeared on the screen. The dead is remembered, and we are coming. Kevin read the words 3 times, and he did not understand them, and then he looked at the signature, and his heart stopped. Valerie searched his memory, and the name meant nothing to him, and he searched the database and found a footnote about a refugee species that humanity had helped 2 centuries ago, and he read about Emily Parker and the 3 colony ships and the small debt that was owed. Kevin laughed, and it was not a happy laugh, because what could one small species do against the Dominion, and what did it matter that they remembered a debt from 200 years ago? And how could they possibly help when every other species had turned away? But Somewhere deep inside him, a tiny spark of hope flickered back to life. He sent a response on the same encrypted channel. "This is Ambassador Kevin Mitchell of Earth, and we are under Dominion occupation, and our fleet is destroyed, and our people are being taken, and we need help desperately. But I do not know what you can do." The response came within minutes. "Ambassador Mitchell, we know what has happened to your world, and we have been watching, and we have been preparing, and we have been waiting for this day for 200 years. Kevin felt tears forming in his eyes, and he did not know if they were tears of hope or tears of despair too. 100 years ago, a human woman named Emily Parker saved our people when we were dying, and she gave us food and shelter and a new home. And she asked only that we pay the debt forward someday." Evan read the words, and something stirred in his memory. Because he had learned about this in school as a child, but it had seemed like such a small thing, and such a long time ago. "We have not forgotten, Ambassador Mitchell, and we will never forget, and the debt your people gave us was small. But our gratitude is not small, and our preparation is not small, and our response will not be small." The message paused, and Kevin held his breath. "Tell your people to hold on, and tell them that help is coming, and tell them that humanity does not stand alone. We will be there in 17 days. Kevin sat in the darkness of the bunker, and he read the message again, and he did not know what the Valari could possibly do. But for the first time since the invasion began, he felt something other than despair. He began to spread the word through the resistance networks, and he told them that help was coming. And some of them laughed, and some of them cried, and some of them did not believe him, but all of them held on because hope was the only weapon they had left, and sometimes hope was enough. Admiral Grace Thompson had not slept in 11 days, and her eyes burned and her hands shook, and her heart felt like a stone in her chest. But she could not rest, because rest meant death, and death meant the end of everything. Her fleet was all that remained of humanity's once proud navy, and it was not much, and she knew it was not much, and every time she looked at the 17 battered ships under her command, she felt the weight of humanity's survival pressing down on her shoulders. They had been running for weeks since the fall of Earth and the Dominion. Kill squads were always behind them, and always hunting, and always getting closer, and Grace had lost count of how many times they had barely escaped with their lives. The ships were damaged, and the crews were exhausted, and the ammunition was running low, and the fuel was running lower, and Grace had done the math in her head 100 times, and the math always said the same thing: they could not run forever. She stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Defiant, and she looked at the tired faces of her crew, and she wished she had something to tell them, and she wished she had some hope to offer them, but she had nothing left to give the censor officer, a young woman named Lisa. Turner spoke up suddenly, and her voice cracked with something that might have been fear or might have been wonder. "Admiral, there are ships dropping out of hyperspace, and a lot of ships." Grace felt her blood run cold, because this was it, and the Dominion had finally caught them, and there was nowhere left to run. "How many?" she asked, and her voice was steady, even though her heart was pounding. Lisa stared at her console, and her face went pale, and she looked up at Grace with wide eyes. "Admiral, I am reading 4,000 contacts, and they are not Dominion signatures, and I do not recognize the configuration at all." Grace moved to the tactical display, and she watched as the contacts appeared one after another, and the display struggled to keep up with the sheer number of ships materializing around her small fleet. 4,000 warships, arranged in perfect formation, and their hulls gleamed with technology that made the Defiant sensors scream warnings, and Grace had never seen anything like it, and she did not know if this was salvation or a different kind of doom. A communication request came through, and Grace accepted it, because what else could she do? The view screen flickered, and a face appeared, and it was not human, and it was not Dominion, and Grace found herself looking at a tall figure with silver skin and large, dark eyes that held something ancient and patient and kind. "Admiral Thompson," the figure said, and her voice was calm and measured, "and the Valari First Fleet reporting. As promised, Grace stared at the screen, and her mind struggled to process what she was seeing. I am Admiral Serafina. Wells, she continued, and 200 years ago, a human woman named Emily Parker saved my people when we had nothing, and she gave us food and hope and a new home, and she asked only that we pay the debt forward. Serafina paused, and her dark eyes seemed to look directly into Grace's soul. Today, we pay that debt. Grace felt her legs go weak, and she grabbed the edge of the command console to steady herself. You built all this for us, she whispered, and her voice was barely audible. Serafina nodded slowly and solemnly. For 200 years we have prepared for this moment, Admiral Thompson, and we studied the Dominion, and we learned their weaknesses, and we built ships designed specifically to counter their technology, and we trained our crews for the battles we knew would come. She leaned forward, and her silver face was filled with determination. The debt your ancestor gave us was small, she said, but the gratitude of the Valari is not small, and when Emily Parker saved 12,000 of us, she saved a future of 800 million, and every one of those 800 million knows her name, and every one of them carries the debt in their heart. Grace felt tears streaming down her face, and she did not try to stop them. 800 million, she repeated, and every single one of them volunteered for this fleet, Serafina said, and we had to turn away millions more because we did not have enough ships for all who wanted to come. The bridge crew of the Defiant was silent, and Grace could see tears on other faces too, and she could see hope dawning in eyes that had been hollow with despair. Why? Grace asked, and she had to know, and she could not understand how a kindness 200 years old could create something this vast. Serafina smiled, and it was a smile that held centuries of gratitude, because Emily Parker did not ask what we could give her in return, she said, and she did not calculate the value of our lives, and she did not weigh the cost against the benefit, and she simply saw people who were suffering, and she helped them because it was the right thing to do. Serafina placed her hand over her heart. That is a debt that can never truly be repaid, she said, but we will spend eternity trying. Grace straightened her spine and wiped her eyes, and she was still the Admiral, and she still had a job to do. What is the plan, she asked. Serafina nodded approvingly. The Dominion believes humanity stands alone, she said, and they believe your species is broken and defeated and finished, and they have become complacent in their victory. Her eyes hardened, and the kindness in them was replaced by something cold and fierce. They are about to learn how wrong they are. Tactical display updated, and Grace saw the Valari fleet moving into position around her 17 ships, and she saw the formation taking shape, and she understood what Serafina was planning. We will hit them at Earth, Serafina said, and we will break their fleet, and we will free your people, and we will show the galaxy what happens when you harm those the Valari have sworn to protect. Grace looked at the 4,000 ships surrounding her small fleet, and she thought about Emily Parker, who had given away her supplies to strangers without expecting anything in return, and she thought about how small kindnesses can grow into something enormous when given enough time. Admiral, well, she said, and her voice was strong again, we are honored to fight beside you. Serafina smiled. The honor is ours, Admiral Thompson, and today we fulfill a promise 200 years in the making. She raised her hand, and the Valari fleet acknowledged. With a pulse of light from every ship for Emily Parker, she said. The crew of the Defiant raised their fists, for Earth. Grace replied, and the combined fleet turned toward Sol and toward war, and toward a reckoning that the Dominion never saw coming. The Dominion fleet commander Vex Thorn had conquered 47 worlds in his long career, and he had broken a dozen species, and he had never lost a major battle, and he stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Conquest, and he watched the approaching enemy fleet with contempt. 500 Dominion warships held orbit around Earth, and they were the finest vessels in the Empire, and their crews were veterans of 100 campaigns, and Vex Thorn had no doubt that this battle would be over quickly. The silver-skinned aliens had brought 4,000 ships, but Vex Thorin knew that numbers meant nothing against Dominion superiority, and he had seen larger fleets crumble before his guns, and he expected this one to crumble to crumbled. Same way he did not know about the 200 years of preparation. He did not know about the scientists who had studied every Dominion battle ever recorded and found every weakness and every flaw and every vulnerability. He did not know about the engineers who had built weapons specifically designed to cut through Dominion shields like they were made of paper. He did not know about the admirals who had wargamed this exact scenario 10,000 times until they could predict every Dominion maneuver before it happened. He knew none of these things, and that was why he was about to lose. The Valari fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, and Admiral Serafina Wells gave the order to attack, and 4,000 ships surged forward. As one, the first volley struck the Dominion formation, and Vex Thorin watched in disbelief as his shields failed and his ships exploded, and his tactical display filled with warning lights and error messages. This was not possible. The Dominion had the most advanced shields in the galaxy, and they had never been breached so easily. And Vex Thorin screamed orders at his crew and demanded answers that nobody could give him. The Bakuv Valari weapons had been designed over 2 centuries to do exactly one thing, and that was to kill Dominion ships, and they did it with terrible efficiency. But the Valari were not alone. Admiral Grace Thompson led her 17 human ships directly into the heart of the Dominion formation, and it was suicide, and everyone knew it was suicide, but the humans did not care because they had nothing left to lose and everything left to avenge. The human ships were damaged and outdated and outgunned, but the humans inside them fought with a fury that the Dominion had never encountered before, and they did not fight like a military force conducting an operation, and they fought like a wounded animal defending its home and its family and its right to exist. Captain David Kim commanded the destroyer Vengeance, and he was 34 years old, and he had lost his parents in the initial invasion, and he had lost his sister to a Dominion labor camp, and he had lost everything that ever mattered to him when his weapons failed and his engines were damaged and his ship was dying around him. David Kim did not retreat, and he did not surrender, and he did not give up. Aimed his ship at the bridge of the Eternal Conquest, and he pushed the engines to maximum, and he opened a channel that every ship in the battle could. Here for Earth, he said, and then the Vengeance struck the Dominion flagship at full speed, and both ships disappeared in a ball of fire that could be seen from the surface of Earthvex. Thorin died never understanding what had happened, and never understanding how a species he had dismissed as weak and broken had destroyed him with nothing but rage and determination, and a battered destroyer that should not have been able to reach him. The death of the flagship sent shockwaves through the Dominion fleet, and their coordination faltered, and their formations broke, and the Valari pressed the advantage with ruthless precision. Admiral Serafina Wells watched the battle unfold on her tactical display, and she directed her forces with calm efficiency. And she honored every human sacrifice by making sure it meant something. The humans continued to fight alongside her, and they threw themselves into impossible situations, and they refused to retreat, and they refused to surrender, and they died by the dozens, but they took Dominion ships with them every time. Grace Thompson lost half her remaining fleet in the first 3 hours, but she did not waver, and she did not hesitate, and she led from the front, the way her ancestors had always led. The battle lasted 9 hours, and when it was over, the Dominion armada was nothing but ash and debris floating in the void around Earth, and not a single Dominion ship survived, and not a single Dominion crew member escaped. The Valari had lost 600 ships, and the humans had lost 11 of their 17, but the price had been paid, and Earth was free. Grace Thompson stood on the bridge of the Defiant, and she looked at the planet below her, and she saw the Dominion occupation forces surrendering, and she saw human resistance fighters emerging from hiding, and she saw her people looking up at the sky with hope in their eyes for the first time in months. Serafina appeared on her view screen, and the Valari admiral looked exhausted but triumphant. "It is done," she said. Grace nodded, and she could not speak because her throat was tight with emotion. "The Dominion forces on Earth are surrendering," Serafina continued, "and your people are free." Admiral Thompson Grace finally found her voice. "We could not have done this without you," she said, "and we owe you everything." Serafina shook her head. "You owe us nothing," she said, "and the debt was already ours, and today we have only begun to repay it." Grace thought about the ship she had lost, and the crews who had died, and the humans who had sacrificed everything to free their world. "What happens now?" she asked. Serafina smiled, and it was not a gentle smile, and it was a smile that promised more battles, and more victories, and more justice. "Now," she said, "we take the war to them, and the Dominion has enslaved 100 species and conquered 1,000 worlds, and today we begin to tear their empire apart." She leaned forward, and her dark eyes burned with purpose. "Emily Parker gave us a second chance," she said, "and we will not rest until we have given that same chance to every species suffering under Dominion rule." Grace felt something stir in her chest, and it was not just hope, and it was not just gratitude, and it was something fiercer and more powerful. "Count Ewison," she said, "and humanity will fight beside you until the end." Serafina placed her hand over her heart. "Together," she said. "Together," Grace replied, and the alliance that would reshape the galaxy was sealed in that moment, and the Dominion had no idea what was coming for them. The Dominion had ruled their empire for 6,000 years, and they had believed they would rule for 6,000 more, and they had believed that nothing could challenge their power and nothing could break their grip on the galaxy. They were wrong. The Human-Valari alliance tore through their empire like fire through dry grass, and world after world fell, and system after system was liberated, and the chains that had bound 100 species were shattered one by one. They did not conquer, and they did not enslave, and they did not become the thing they were fighting against, and instead they freed every world they touched and gave every species the chance to determine their own future. Oppressed peoples of the Dominion saw what was happening, and they rose up in rebellion, and they joined the fight, and the alliance grew stronger with every victory, while the Dominion grew weaker with every defeat. Admiral Grace Thompson led the human forces, and Admiral Serafina Wells led the Valari, and together they were unstoppable, and together they showed the galaxy what true partnership looked like. Ambassador Kevin Mitchell worked tirelessly to build coalitions and forge alliances, and he brought species together that had never trusted each other before, and he showed them that unity was possible and that kindness was not weakness. Campaign lasted 18 months, and when it was over, the Dominion was broken, and their ruling council had fled into the unknown regions of space, and their empire existed only in history books and cautionary tales. 1 year after the liberation of Earth, the newly formed Galactic Council met for the first time, and 200 species gathered in the Great Hall that had been built on neutral ground. And they came to witness the birth of a new era. Kevin Mitchell stood at the podium, and beside him stood Serafina Wells and Dr. James Parker, the great-great-grandson of Emily Parker, who had been elected as the first president of the restored Earth. Republic Kevin looked out at the assembled delegates, and he thought about everything that had happened, and everything that had been lost, and everything that had been gained, too. 100 years ago he began, and his voice carried across the vast chamber. A human research ship encountered a dying species drifting through space, and the captain of that ship was named Emily Parker, and she saw 12,000 refugees with no food and no future. He paused and let the silence stretch. She did not ask what they could give her in return, and she did not calculate the value of their lives, and she did not weigh the costs against the benefits, and she simply helped them because they needed help, and she had the ability to provide it. Kevin turned to look at Serafina, and she nodded solemnly. She gave them her supplies, and she called for more ships, and she found them a new home, and when they asked how they could repay her, she told them to pay it forward someday, and she thought it was a small thing, and she thought it would be forgotten. His voice grew stronger. But the Valari did not forget, and they remembered for 200 years, and they built an entire civilization around that memory. And when humanity faced its darkest hour, they came with 4,000 ships and 800 million hearts full of gratitude. Kevin stepped back, and James Parker stepped forward, and he had his ancestors' eyes, and he had her smile, and he carried her legacy in everything he did. The species that abandoned humanity in our time of need have seen what loyalty looks like, James said, and the empire that sought to break US has learned what happens when you underestimate the power of kindness. He looked around the chamber at the representatives of species that had once been Dominion slaves, and species that had once been Dominion masters, and species that had watched from the sidelines while humanity burned. My ancestor gave the Valari a small debt and a new home, he said, and today that debt has been repaid 10 million times over. But the Valari have taught us something far more valuable than military strength. He placed his hand over his heart the same way Emily had done so long ago. Kindness is never small, and compassion is never wasted, and the bonds we forge in mercy will always be stronger than the chains forged in conquest. Serafina stepped forward, and she placed her own hand over her heart. For 200 years, my people asked ourselves how we could repay a debt that felt infinite, she said. And for 200 years, we prepared, and we built, and we waited, and we wondered if the day would ever come when we could show humanity what their kindness meant to us. Her voice trembled with emotion. That day came, and we answered, and we would do it again 1,000 times, because that is what gratitude means, and that is what loyalty means, and that is what it means to be worthy of the gift we were given. She turned to face James, and her silver face was bright with tears. The debt is paid, she said, but the friendship will last forever. James took her hand, and they stood together, and the chamber erupted in applause, and they, representatives of 200 species, witnessed the moment when a small act of kindness, 2 centuries old, finally came full circle. The Galactic Council adopted the Parker Doctrine as its founding principle, and the doctrine was simple, and it was this: when you have the ability to help those who are suffering, you help them, and you do not ask what they can give you in return, and you trust that kindness creates more kindness, and compassion creates more compassion, and the universe becomes better one small act at a time. In the rebuilt city of Geneva, a monument was erected in the central square, and it showed Emily Parker and High Elder Torvald standing hand in hand with their faces turned toward the stars. The Bavost of Stars. The mod showed Emily Parker and High Elder Torvald standing hand in hand with their faces turned toward the stars. The inscription at the base was simple: pay it forward, and across the galaxy, species that had once been strangers began to help each other, and species that had once been enemies began to forgive each other, and the darkness that had ruled for so long began to recede in the face of a simple truth: that kindness multiplies, that compassion echoes, that a small debt given freely can become a gift that saves worlds. Emily Parker never knew what her actions would become, and she never saw the fleet that bore her legacy, and she never witnessed the empire that fell because of her compassion, and she died believing she had done nothing more than help some refugees find a new home. But 200 years later, her name was known on 1,000 worlds, and her story was told to children of 100 species, and her small act of kindness had become the foundation of a new galactic order built on the radical idea that helping others was its own reward. And somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, her spirit smiled, because the debt had been small, but the response had been infinite.